the figures that you've sculpted just rather recently is one that I'm really excited about, which is the, let's call it a resculpt of your original Green Stuff figure.
Oh, right. That first horseman that I did, yeah.
Yep. Which we got pictures of the original up on the website right now. And the of the resculpt. Would you call it a resculpt? Is that?
It's basically the same figure the way I do it now instead of when I first started sculpting 50 years ago.
And that, so originally it would have been, it was a Rider of Rohan type?
Yeah.
Something in that ballpark?
Well, I can remember I tried to make figures because nobody, you know, I was pretty clueless and nobody told me anything about how to construct these things. The whole conversation I had with Stan Glazier about sculpting was just, they put it in a spin mold, and he didn't explain how they were made, the molds were made, and that nowadays they make them out of epoxy rather than carving them out of solder, which is what we used to do. Because the figures he'd seen that made him think, that made him make this offhand remark about you want a job as a sculptor, were some British colonial figures that I made, some Beja tribesmen, and they all have weird hairdos. But of course, they only came with one hairdo and one pose at the time. That's the way figures were. So what I did was I took the sprues like off a model airplane, styrene plastic. If you heat it just a bit, it melts without burning, and then I just touch it to the figure and leave this lump of plastic on its head, and then I'd carve it down with a sharp knife to get different hairstyles. And those are the ones he saw and said, who makes these? And I told him, I can't remember, I think it was either Minifigs or Hinchcliffe. And he said, is it new? Is it a different thing? Because I'd never seen these. And I said, no, I modified it. We modified the hair and things. And I told him I did it by melting styrene plastic on it. And he said, well, that's not too different than how we sculpt figures. You want a job? And then he told me about epoxy. He just said the word epoxy is all he said. So. And I went out and tried to do it, and I didn't know that it needed a framework under it, like a wire framework or something to keep it from going all over the place. So I just tried to make figures straight up out of it. Of course, they just went flop or blob. And even if you tried to make a framework first out of the epoxy and then harden and then work on it, it would be just wiggling all over the place the way you worked on it. So what I did finally was make a horseman, a guy on horseback, because his legs are on next to the horse, and all I had to work on was the upper body and the arms and things, and that didn't flop around too much when I made a framework for it, but not with wire, just with the epoxy itself.
Gotcha. So you sculpted it directly onto that horse that it sat on.
Yeah.
Did anyone ever talk to you about breaking it off and trying to cast it?
It would be a bad idea, both because it's a horrible figure and also because it doesn't have anything in it, but it's just a lump of epoxy. But after that, I got some sense and started twisting wire and using that for a framework, and then I was able to make things better. And like I said, I made several figures and I took them, showed to the people, and that's when I decided to go back and see if Stan Glazier was serious about paying me to sculpt things.
Was the wizard on the
And he was.
Was he one of the early ones, or
No.
no?
The early things I made were all stuff in the Der Kriegspieler style, even though I hated it and knew I could do better than some of the stuff already. It was in the Der Kriegspieler style, which was, they had these horrible undead eyes where they didn't put a ball in the middle, they just did the lip and then they hit a hole where the eye would be. And I thought, well, why don't you just put a little bit of stuff in there and have an eyeball? But that wasn't the way any of the rest of them were made. And they didn't want me to do it because it would make them look too different.
Could be thinking of the wrong
They had me
one.
doing humans because, mainly because I guess they had other people that did goblins.
I know there was Rich Smethurst pointed out he had a copy of a Man of Dale
Right.
with in basically like an English longbowman pose.
Right.
And he had said he had thought that was one of your earlier
Oh, yeah,
ones.
it was.
Do you recall what any of the others might have been?
Oh, I did an Easterling and things. I did a guy with an axe over his head. I did a goblin on on wolf back. I did do a goblin. I remember now because I remember he had horns and an axe over his head, and I touched the axe to the horns so that they would all intersect and cast.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that because one of the few times I talked to Duke was when he looked at that and said, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea."
Did he end up putting that one into production?
I assume so.
Because I know one of your early goblins, you've got a mounted goblin with axe for Partha that does that too.
I just done the same thing again.
Just followed up on what worked. That's neat. Yeah, because I'd like to track down what those original figures you did are, because nobody knows.
They were pretty crude, because not only because I was just doing this because it paid better than the paper route, but also because I was copying the Creeksville style, which was done in solder and AV plumber's putty.
In my opinion, it's still important. It's like if you were told, in this box are Leonardo da Vinci's sketches when he was 8.
Oh, please. Yeah.
You're still gonna open it, right?
I guess, although, Leonardo might not approve, but in any case, I wasn't infused with passion for art like Leonardo da Vinci, nor, it's not really comparable. I was just, my interest, the closest interest I had when I was young to sculpting was building models. I like to build models. I like to take mechanical things apart and use the parts for other things, but I was mainly mechanically minded, which is probably why, although I'm a good technical sculptor, I make no great claim to being an imaginative one. But then, that's a matter of taste. One person's idea of perfect imagination is completely different from others, whereas most people agree about what's technically well done.